everybody, and welcome to Finding Fashion. I'm your host, Pojo. I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to an eco-fashion podcast that is not clinically depressing. I'm so excited to start this journey with you all. We are going to be exploring the future of fashion and what it means to be diving into a more sustainable world. Fashion, as you guys know, is a part of all of our lives, and I'm just so thrilled to have you all here so we can explore what a better future really looks like. And I want to also let you know that this show is powered by Galaxy. If you're not sure what Galaxy is, whether you're into vintage, upcycled fashion, or just supporting small businesses and creatives, Galaxy is the perfect platform to find your fashion. Later in this episode, we're actually going to be spotlighting an awesome creator on Galaxy, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Whew, wow. There's so much rushing through my mind right now. You know, when I think about what sustainable fashion really means, I go a million places. And I really want to start with this word that we're talking about today, which is sustainability. It's a loaded word. You might be like, oh, I have an idea of what sustainability means, but do you? That's the question. We all have different definitions. There are criticisms that come with that word. And there's a lot of confusion that especially comes with that word. And it's a shame because when we have a word like this that's defining what we are hopeful about and like a hopeful, environmentally conscious future, which this word is always pushing for that, we really want to make sure that the foundation of our interpretation of what we're going to get into is educated, concise, and clear. So the decisions we're making, especially in fashion, are educated and allowing us to push forward for a better future. And I'm somebody, by the way, I know you'll get to know me throughout the season, but I have a very extensive background in fashion. I grew up modeling. I grew up around a lot of designers, small designers, big businesses, you name it. I remember when I was in 5th grade, my mom finally told me what a shopping mall was. She strategically hid it from me, which I thought was pretty evil. I was like, what do you mean all my friends are going to these places and shopping and doing this? I was a hand-me-down girl like most of my life. And when you realize how broad the fashion industry really is and how much there is to learn and explore, it's very overwhelming, and for good reason. We're overproducing, we're overexposed to so many trends online, and all you can do is really sit back and ask yourself, like, what does this mean for my personal style? There's so much we're absorbing all the time. So I am beyond excited to start this show with you guys and really dive into what it means for us personally to explore a more eco-conscious style and fashion future. And I know we keep touching on future, but the decisions we're making now are what is going to define that. When it comes to what the foundation of this show really is, and also the core values of Galaxy, I realize it's all about community, and it's also all about understanding who you're supporting and your network. And I wanted to make sure that if we're going to go into this world of fashion and what a better future for fashion looks like, we're starting with the facts. And we're also starting with a conversation around what sustainability really means to us. Because how are we going to define a more mindful future if we don't actually know what mindfulness needs to entail or what we need to consider before we make these decisions? So whether or not you're well-versed in the convo, I'm really excited to start this season with a bang and introduce you to one of my absolute favorite creators. I'm a little biased because I've been a fan for a while, but let me introduce you to my good friend Isaias from Queer Brown Vegan. For those that don't know, he's the founder of his platform. It's a platform online that shares information about intersectional sustainability, and it cultivated a community of like-minded people who are wanting to learn more about environmentalism, myself included. So, Isaias, welcome to Finding Fashion. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. And I'm super excited for this conversation because I know that so many people have so many questions these days.
Yes, and I can only imagine the feedback we're going to get from this. And I already know your DMs are going to be flooded with questions itself. I'm just so grateful that you're on today to help conquer just the foundation of what this show is really supposed to be about, and also to learn a lot more about your work and your journey to getting to where you are now. You're such an established voice online. You're the reason why a lot of people also are like entering the sustainability space with passion and excitement, which is hard to come by, as you know. There's a lot of I know we're going to talk about climate doomism in the future, but there's a lot that, weighs us down as people, especially empathic people that care about the planet and want to be more conscious. I'm just so grateful that you do the work you do, and I'm really excited to touch on everything. So thank you for your energy and time, seriously.
No, of course. And thank you so much again for having me.
No, of course. Okay, so Isaias, there's so much to get into. But I really want to start from where you began in your journey with sustainability and just environmental justice and all of these things you're passionate about. When did this conversation begin for you within your own head or just in your life? Like, were you introduced to these concepts? Was sustainability something you were always, curious about? When did you start to really dive into this sustainable realm, if you will?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think for me, like introducing myself into this environment was in Los Angeles, right? My parents had immigrated from Mexico. And, my whole life I grew up in affordable housing, off food stamps, and taking public transportation. And I think my relationship to awareness and to the green environmental journey was starting off with like as a children, right? A lot of us are introduced to like recycling and gardening. And I think that that was a really great opening for me to be curious. The question that I always had is that, even though at school we're doing these programs and they're taking us to these field trips where they're teaching us about environmentalism, a lot of us don't have access to clean air, water, or soil. And I think for me, it almost seemed like as if it was almost always a privilege and always for low income people to feel ashamed for themselves for not having these resources. And I think I grew up a bit angry at myself because I didn't know the right words of how to express that type of injustice that was happening. And I think as I got older, I started to become more curious and started to get more in trouble in classrooms for asking types of questions. And I think in middle school, that's when I learned about global warming.
Mm-hmm.
And, you saw the pandas, like, the polar bears, like, melting ice, like
Yeah.
wildfires. And Nat Geo and Discovery Channel were huge inspirations in the beginning for my journey. And I just told myself, I want to do something environmentally related. I didn't really know how that all intersected in my own livelihood, but I saw sustainability for myself growing up as a way of survival, and I saw it as a very way for me to kind of understand more about my culture. And I think that took time to unlearn because I saw that as a privilege when I was in college, because I always told myself, well, who has time to be recycling or who has time to even be buying these products, because I don't have time and I don't have any money.
Right. It's so interesting you say that because we are introduced to so many different images so young, like you said, like the polar bears and the ice melting and these things that feel like so outside of yourself because it's not directly in your environment. And then the recycling things, which are so, directly involving like our daily decisions. And yet it still feels far away, especially when, priorities aren't necessarily like making sure you find a recycling bin in a place where there aren't a lot of recycling initiatives, or maybe there's isn't as much access. But that's such an interesting angle. And kudos to you for asking those questions regardless, because it's true. There's a lot of pushback when you're curious about things like that, especially when there aren't really any systems that are helping you be curious and also helping push for change. I'm sure that was really hard when you were that young too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times it was just the fact of like, I don't know the right words. And there's so many children in educational spaces in K through 12, like that are so curious, they're so creative, right? Like that's like where a lot of creativeness happens. But yet you see the ongoing defunding of public schools, teachers not wanting to teach their children or their students. And so a lot of them become disengaged, and you learn all of these issues in a siloed lens that people are not able to really apply it through this interconnected lens of like, how does math equal creativity? How does science equal design? And all of these things are so important in foundations. But I think that a lot of people in college that get to go start to create these connections and start to question themselves of like, what was it that I was learning my entire life?
Right, exactly. It's like a space that they're actually fueling that conversation, and you're being told to converse about things like that. It's like this buildup, I'm sure. And there's a lot of rage, I'm sure, attached to it as well when you realize like this is a space that should have been cultivated for me from a young age in all of these educational spaces. But no, I totally get it. And I went to public school growing up, like watching things change so rapidly as well has been super concerning. And yeah, no, that's a real thing. I want to dive into a little bit about when you started posting online. That's just a gateway, like the floodgates open there. I think we all know with social media and just consuming media too. When did that start for you? Or when did you decide, I actually want to share with people this passion of mine and the conversations I'm having internally?
Yeah, so I would say that, and after I graduated in 2018, I had this really huge passion for environmentalism, sustainability, digital media, and creative work. And at the time, I applied to all these environmental organizations and I got rejected.
Mm.
And so I ended up landing a creative agency job startup where we both worked at.
Mhm.
And, a year and a half later, realized that I wasn't really using my degree for what I really wanted to do. And I
Right.
told myself honestly that I think that I was living a lie, choosing a career that wasn't really aligned to me, even though it did teach me a lot of skills. And so in November 2019, when I was living in New York, I created Queer Brown Vegan just on a mission just to educate people on simple topics because I said I learned so much in university and it's honestly a privilege to be attending these institutions. And I have so many friends who didn't go to college because that wasn't their calling. And I just wanted to educate people because I think this information should not be privatized. It should be public and free for everyone. And so I created Queer Brown Vegan on the basis of this infographic account to make it colorful by design, to make it engaging, and to make it very accessible through a lived experience and cultural component with the addition of science to ensure that people have this holistic lens in their sustainability journey.
I love that. And you really have touched so many people so fast. I didn't even realize it was 2019, you know?
Mhm.
I remember when I was like reintroduced to like the work you were doing, I was like, oh my gosh, like Isaias, like he's really killing it. Like, how does it feel to also like grow a platform that large so fast with like a mission like that? I'm sure it was like really like cathartic almost to be like, oh my gosh, people were really listening and they really want to learn.
Yeah, I was really shocked because I didn't really expect any time for my social media platform to grow. Like my goal was never to really become big or famous or influence or a voice in the space. It was rather to
Right.
just give justice for a lot of low income students that never got that education because I know how frustrating it can feel being in these spaces where you're expected to know all the scientific language and how to eloquently speak. And I said, no, it's like honestly a privilege to learn all of these information. So
Totally.
I'm going to give it free for anyone. They can use whatever they want and then build themselves up because I know how it is to struggle in this space. And so seeing the growth was really a privilege for me, but it also made me feel that, perhaps this is the work that I was truly aligned for. And I'm really thankful that, it wasn't easy to get here, but it took me time to understand what I wanted to feel comfortable in.
No, of course. And I'm sure too with the internet, it's a creating healthy boundaries for yourself. Like, look, no one's perfect to begin with. We're all human. And I think this is what I really love about your media, just to like get on like a little box right now and start talking about why I love your work. You have made it so it doesn't feel judgmental and it doesn't feel like if you do something wrong, shame on you. You're like, you can't be, you're not a sustainable, like, or even a student of like this environmentalism that we're all learning about. Like you make it so it's okay to come in and it's okay to learn that, oh, these things I'm doing every day, like maybe aren't the best decision. And I actually want to change that. Or maybe today isn't the day that I make the permanent change, but today is the day that I start educating myself on what the change should look like. You've made it so it's a warm and comforting place to kind of fall and learn about these things and also grow together. I see your comment sections, like people are really passionate about what you're like. The conversation continues. A lot of people would kill for that type of like community, you know? So it's really, really awesome that you've cultivated that so naturally. And I
Yeah.
could just see it in your work. Like you really are so passionate. I don't know. This is turning into an Isaias fan account. So I just want to let you guys know, like, if you're not following him, obviously, don't worry. We'll throw you all the handles at the end, but just make sure you get on your little search engines and get going. Creating content is a job. I mean, you and I know this, but like such a job. I see how much you're putting out there. To also be absorbing so much information, I can imagine is just like boom, boom, boom. You're being hit with so much. How do you stay inspired to create and stay positive? Like you really do such a great job of like retaining that energy and that, that spark. So how do you do that for yourself, or what do you do in like your time to yourself to like stay energized?
Yeah, I think it's always about being intentional, right? Like I, for myself, love journaling. I got into it a few years ago, and I've really become a writer. I never really saw myself as a writer growing up because I was always told I was horrible at writing. But I think like in creating content, right? Like I don't only think about it through this like Western science lens. I think about it through a cultural lens. in a lived experience lens, because I think that what gets people to learn more is adding this like cultural component and lived component where the person's like, wow, I never really thought about that. But now that you bring this up about your own experience, there's actually something happening in my own city. And so that's how you draw connections with people. And I don't see really much the content creation process as like me extracting myself, but rather in this cyclical way where I'm not necessarily the educator, I'm also the student. And so I feel like I enter this space through a decentralized lens of I'm also joining you within the circle because I want to discuss this issue because I'm curious to learn more. And that's how kind of conversations begin, and more people share it, or more people are just sharing their own views with it, or saying I never knew about this. And so every day is kind of a blessing of like we get to learn new things, which isn't so much digital pollution, but a more of a slow way of learning where you're not being judged, you're not being graded on of how well you know, you're just being asked, well, what are your thoughts on just the term? What do you think about it?
Right. Wow, that's so cool. It also kind of, that plays on this idea that we need to be very conscious of what we're consuming daily too, because there's an opportunity to consume things that are teaching us something rather than, I don't know, the white noise, I guess, of social media, that it can feel that way. But I just know whenever I see you on my feed, I feel excited to learn about whatever you're about to talk about. I mean, I was so excited the other day. You posted like you picking from an orange tree, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like so great. I like learned all these facts. I'm like, oh my, like it's just making some noise, right? Like making a bunch of noise in here. I'm like, it's really exciting to get to learn with you. And I like that you said it that way. You're absorbing information and then you're relaying that information in a way that's like creating a soundboard for conversation. And you do a wonderful job. As you're a student, and as many of us are, do you have any recommendations for people that would want to also do what you do and cultivate some sort of community online and share these types of like forms of information? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I've always tell people collaborate. That's what gets you through the industries. And I think like myself being a grassroots platform, necessarily saying I'm not self-made, I'm collectively made by my community, by my experience, by the people who loved me and encouraged me. So really asking yourself, what is the deepest way of that you love to translate and to communicate to people? For people, sometimes it can be photography. For others, it can be modeling. For others, it can be designing. For others, it can be poetry or writing. And I think that's so deep. And I think for people, just trying different experimentations and different designs, whether that's a podcast, whether that's a YouTube channel, like there's just different medium outlets that exist. And I think no one should ever feel that, oh my God, this person's doing the same thing I want to do, so I shouldn't do it, because that is not how it works. Like there's no such thing as myself being the original developer of education on Instagram. Like, no, that's not the case. It's more about like, how do we collectively share space so we can reach other audiences? And I think specifically high schoolers and college students see these careers like opening up now, and they're just like, oh my God, how do I get into sustainability? And that's one of the hardest things I tell people is like, this is industries like emerging, and I'm one of the first ones, I guess, experimenting through this process. And so really just cold call, emailing people, setting up Zoom calls, like I really make it a fact to, I try to meet with my community. And like now I have enough funding to finally hire summer interns, which a lot of people have expressed on my media platform that they would want to intern for me. And so giving back to the community is essential, and just remembering the fact of like, it's okay if that project or that assignment that you're doing doesn't, succeed or doesn't grow the way that you want, but it's a learning experience. And I've had experiences where I had other projects before this where they grew to it themselves, but I didn't really relate to that work anymore. And so I wanted to evolve.
Totally. Oh, I love that. I love that you're creating a community that's also like liberated through your work, literally, because you're giving them opportunities. You're just the best. I love that. So sustainability, right? Am I right?
The buzzword.
The buzzword of the year, of the century, of I don't know, of our lives at least.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious. I just want to discuss this word for one. It's something that everywhere I go, especially with the work we do, all you hear is sustainability all day. I'm sure. How many times do you think you hear sustainability in a day with the work you do?
On social media, I think like 30 plus times.
Oh my God. So what did this word even mean to you when you were a kid? Like, was this something you were hearing, or did you feel like you were introduced to it when you were younger, or was it something that when you started to, like, when you were in the college space and having the conversations, like, was that when it emerged? Like, when did sustainability come into your life?
Yeah.
Literally.
So I would say that, being resourceful or, cyclical in your own ways was a form of survival for me growing up. So I didn't really relate it to like eco-friendly or sustainability. It's just like, this is what you have and this is what you use. And you
Right.
just kind of normalize that. But I think at 18, when I was an environmental science student at Berkeley, like I learned about sustainability, and institutionally it's defined as a sustaining of natural resources. But that kind of often is a really bit ambiguous, right? Because when we talk about resources, what are we talking about, right? Resources are related to the land, they're related to the culture, they're related to the people and animals. And so for me, the way I define sustainability was this circular lifestyle that recognizes the livelihood of humans and animals and does not create a negative discharge to the environment, and recognizes that the resources and the culture and the stories that we use that come from the earth are also returned to the earth when we're using them. And so this practice of sustainability for me is more through a spiritual lens rather than what you would say a physical region, because I believe that within each bioregions throughout the world, sustainability is uniquely defined to many indigenous cultures. And I think for me, I kind of use it as a way as this holistic lens so people can kind of create their own relationship to sustainability.
That's so powerful. And it just shows too, yeah, like how could everyone from every background across the world have the same interpretation? We're all consuming differently. We're all in different environments. We all have different spiritual practices, communities, etc. It makes absolute sense to make it customized to each person, or for each person to create that relationship themselves. I know for me, like if you asked me even 10 years ago, when I started modeling, like what that even meant to me, I would be like, drink water and don't waste, or like don't like or wash my clothes with cold water, like the very like these little like things that also like things were fed, like little stories were fed. It's completely different than now, where I'm just like you in like a PR lens. We think about like, all right, giftings or the types of events we go to, the impact, the things we're posting about, like very conscious of like what our direct decisions, how they influence other people, especially sharing online, especially the amount that you do. There's this idea online that the ideal sustainable person is fully vegan, plastic free, wears all like organic cotton and drives an electric car and just blah, blah, blah. Like that is such a consumer perspective, of course. But I'm really curious what your thoughts on that, because is that a realistic lifestyle shift or, blueprint, if you will, for what a sustainable life really looks like for people?
I would say like the modern sustainability movement, specifically how the media centers the lifestyle movement, does a good job in erasing a lot of the ways of how sustainability is practiced for a lot of cultures. And I kind of look back at the way of different people's livelihoods. There are people who have grown up their entire lives using public transportation because they didn't have access to a car,
Right.
or couldn't have their parents drive them, and they are still seen as less than. And so it's almost seen as like a myth that low-income people or working class people are not sustainable, that they're either dirty, they're poor, they use resources, but that's not true. And I think that in dispelling this type of harmful rhetoric, I think we need to zoom out and ask ourselves, like, not everyone's going to think alike because we're all different. And I think being an imperfect environmentalist is the most organic thing you can do. In a lot of my community, I'm like, I don't care if you're not vegan, I don't care if you're not zero waste. Like those things, like, yes, they do matter to me in different ways, but there is this common assumption that every living being in this world, especially within humans, they have this active mindset to try to reduce. And so that is something that is not being shown. And I think that there's a lot of binary statements saying, like if you use plastic, how can you call yourself an environmentalist? If you take flights, how can you call yourself an environmentalist? If you eat meat, how do you call yourself an environmentalist? And there's a lot of these harmful binary statements that I feel like they need to be challenged, and they need to be perhaps expanded on of how we critically think, rather than trying to shut down an individual.
Totally. And also, it's like a vegan table over here. We're both vegan over here. And it's funny because I struggle with that too, from even the vegan lens. I'm told all the time, like, oh, if you wear leather or something like that, like, are you even vegan? And a lot of, I mean, if you know me, I'm a big secondhand baddie. I love myself a sustainable option, right? That's a conversation we had too. I think about it that way. It's like these polarizing assumptions are so blind to the reason why we do what we do anyways. And like why someone like you, I mean, I'm sure your take on veganism is also based off of like the multiple layers of what it really means to make a decision like that. And yeah, like you said, it's not necessarily going to be the answer for other people and their lifestyles. It's also goes back to accessibility. Like that's just not realistic for some people depending on where they are. And like it's so naive for us to assume that the clean, like, you know, the clean, perfect world we're in is going to be solved through like capitalist, you know, solutions when it's really about behaviors. And I so agree. It's like this invisible solution that people are doing subconsciously, especially in low income areas where, yeah, it's less than. And like, isn't that the whole point anyways? Like, are we supposed to buy a new whip because we gotta because we care about the environment? Like there's irony in that, you know, like, and then it goes back to the invisible damage from things like that too. Like, carbon emissions and all these, like how we're sourcing things, like it's just this never ending cycle of like, wait, was that sustainable? It keeps going. I'm so curious to hear what a sustainable world to you, like a utopian sustainable world really looks like in your mind. Like, are there certain solutions that you're hoping for that could actually push us and our society naturally towards a sustainable future? Or are there just things that you're hoping people like adopt into their lifestyles? Like, with everything, you know, you're such a beacon of knowledge. Like what do you still have like hope for when it comes to a sustainable future?
Yeah, you know, I think for me, when I think about sustainable future, I look back and think about, you know, indigenous sovereignty, Black liberation, and I also think about the concept localization, which recognizes to use natural resources within your own bioregion. And that is something that is very difficult to talk about because we live in this global food system, right? All our produce, all our whatever we get comes from this large-scale corporation. We've seen how fossil fuel industries have poisoned land, they have poisoned the people and animals. You know, a sustainable future for me looks into one that is actually actively practicing anti-racist worldviews and to ensure that there's more unity rather than division. But even within trying to achieve world peace, there needs to be this acknowledgement of harm that has been done to people who are people of the global majority. And I think that does reckon with a lot of issues because a lot of industries are not willing to hold themselves accountable. Politicians are not willing to hold themselves accountable. What they're more interested in is their vested corporate interests or their investments. And so we've gotten to a point where we are defending a non-human logo corporation over people and animals. And that is very scary in the way that we navigate this world. Is that why are people so pressed to defend a corporation when that's not even a living being?
Right.
That's just an extractive logo.
And it's such a it's also such a testament to like how material our successes and our like gains in life have become, you know, like so many people strive for like wealth and possessions and like these it's also very like westernized like ideas of like what success looks like or what like a happy like future looks like. You know, of course everyone wants to feel stable and supported and financially capable. Everyone craves that, everyone deserves that. But beyond that is, you know, like especially in our industry, like my industry, fashion, right? Is like rocking a Chanel bag mean you won? Not to call it Chanel. I just say it as an example, you know, like a fashion statement. Like I just find it so sad when I see people are willing to sacrifice so much in their own lives to maintain a status or to create an idea or a facade around what status means to them so they feel like they've won or they've succeeded, when in reality, like, I mean, I now that I've learned so much about, you know, how biodiversity has been diminished just by the consumer culture we're in. In the past 10 years, 15 years, we've doubled our production of garments, and we've actually like sliced, I think the statistic is something like we sliced in half like the usage of each garment. What does that even mean? You know, landfills, like I'm going down the rabbit hole, but this is the episode for it, you guys, because I want to really like stress how important it is that we understand how multifaceted this conversation is, you know, and like what you're saying too, like it's not as simple as what we're seeing on the surface here. There's so much underneath that is like caused the issues and are the reason why we're here today, even having such a loaded conversation about sustainability, right? I really want to go over some definitions with you from your platform because you really are great. You're a beacon of knowledge and you're always sharing a lot of different terms that I never knew personally. Like I'm on my feed and I'm like, oh, throw that in my little dictionary I got. So I want to start with greenwashing. That one's really relevant to finding fashion. What is greenwashing?
Yeah, that is such a great word. I would say that greenwashing and sustainability are often buzzwords too, but
Yes.
the way I kind of look at greenwashing is the intent for corporations, specifically large scale corporations. They have the intent to create an eco friendly line, whether that looks into their packaging, whether that looks into the sourcing of the material, but yet continues to have investments within the fossil fuel industry, private prisons, or other extractive industries. And this is definitely very unique, whether you're looking within the beauty cosmetic industry, the fashion industry, when you look at the vegan clothing being polyester, or you look into just other industries that use no phthalates or no sulfates and other things like that, but yet the sourcing of their production from a large scale view is still extractive. And so I think greenwashing is just easily slapped at other small businesses when they don't really recognize how much work has been put into that, right? Like you can see a small scale business creating a local garment, but they package it in plastic. Unfortunately, do they have the infrastructure to create, 100% compostable or plastic-free packaging? No, that actually does cost a lot of money. And I think there needs to be this acknowledgement from a lot of consumers like ourselves, and even myself including, is that there also is this business analytical side that comes into the cost of what we're producing and how to get to where we want. And necessarily, I think logos, whether you look at B Corp, cruelty free, or plastic free or plastic neutral or carbon neutral, like those logos and certifications, for what they are worth, they do provide transparency into some sense, but they're also not the key, right? Like not every business, especially small ones, are going to be able to afford it. It costs thousands of dollars to afford it and increases by the size of your corporation, by the size of your employees, and it takes a long time to even get B Corp certified, for those who don't know.
Wow. That greenwashing is, that just took me on a journey. That is such, you're so right. That word and sustainability go hand in hand because I think it's really great that you acknowledge small businesses and like the boundaries that don't allow them to necessarily scale certain changes based off of like prices, et cetera. And it goes back into like who we're supporting and why. I love that. Next word. Can we get into environmental racism?
Yeah, this is a really great conversation. And I think with environmental racism, to preface like this term, I think back in 2016, 17, when I learned about it more in depth, it was seen as very controversial. It was seen as an uncomfortable term. Similar as you look at terms into like medical racism or racism itself, right? Environmental racism specifically looks at the policies and practices that are disproportionately designed in many Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So when you look into this type of policies or practices, we have to ask ourselves, why are landfills, why are chemical industries, why are different types of extractive and polluting industries often located in nearby low-income communities? There's the argument of like who came first, the industry or the community. More often than not, it's a community have already pushed there due to redlining or due to systemic racism of many white affluent neighborhoods saying, we don't want Black or Indigenous or people of the global majority living in our communities. Please push them out somewhere. And so a lot of these industries now that are being built, of course, we know that a lot of rich communities have the infrastructure and resources to sue or try to get those industries that are trying to be built in their areas to be like, no, do not build it here. You're going to destroy our neighborhood and our peace. So go build somewhere else. And so where do they go build? In low-income communities where they often don't have as much political or economic resources to fight back these industries. And so they've kind of normalized pollution themselves of like, well, this is what it is. Now we have to live here. And I can't really say anything because these corporations have large scale money to attempt to sue me or try to get rid of my career. And that has happened to different types of states, whether you're looking at industrial agriculture, looking at the petrochemical industry with plastics, or whether you're looking at waste incinerators. Like these are all like awful things that we see, especially here in New Jersey and New York.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the tri-state, like it's hard to dodge, and it goes back to like transit and stuff. Like whether you're doing like public transportation, especially coming to New York, if you're a commuter from Jersey to New York, you are bound to see how that affects the communities, especially bordering the city and in the city too. Outside of like Manhattan specifically, we see it so much. Last word I kind of want to touch on is one I brought up earlier, climate doomism. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say that the way I kind of saw climate doomism is, especially from specifically the West, is it describes the anthropogenic actions that are leading to the climate disaster, which we're seeing right now, the rising global mean temperatures, the rise of carbon emissions, the greenhouse emissions. And so climate doomism is specifically used as a tool to disempower collective movements. What climate doomism doesn't recognize is that the resistance in movements have always existed to create a regenerative just world, and that highly ignores a lot of grassroots activists and organizers that have been actively fighting within their communities. And when we talk about doomism and doom, right, we can look back at like mythical and folklore cultures where there was that character called the doomsayer, where you would see this old wizard dressed in like a weird outfit saying, the end of the world's coming. And this is seen a lot in whether we look at through religion, whether that's like misinterpretations in certain texts and certain ways of how we see it. And so doomism is specifically used here in the West to kind of disempower people to not engage anymore in the climate crisis, meaning like, what does it matter if I don't, if I can't do anything, like the world's going to end, I should stop trying to advocate, or I should stop trying to live for my community. But the reality is that we need to fight against this harmful rhetoric that is being pushed out specifically by climate change deniers, because they know already that their tactics of them trying to advertise, the fossil fuel industry or the fashion industry, like fast fashion specifically, being like, sustainable. What they do instead is like they're saying, okay, now that they know they've called us out on our errors and our lies, let's just try to push them down even more so they can give up. And so climate doomism has been popularized, especially this last year, with the rise of the climate crisis, as we saw here in New York, where it got flooded completely in apartments. And you saw everywhere videos of people just normalizing that their apartments were being flooded.
Mm-hmm. It was so devastating too, and like it just becomes this narrative of like New York City, like a joke, right? Like a meme. And no, I mean it's directly affecting so many people, and like I so agree, and I'm so glad you said it this way. It's like they want you to not care. They want you to normalize these terrible things, and by they I mean the people that are benefiting from the profits of not addressing these issues. And you know what? A lot of that is also like a testament to how they've been conditioned to prioritize profit over an environment that they depend on. It's really, really sad. Well, we're going to take a quick break, you guys, but make sure you stay tuned. We have a lot we're talking about on the other side. Right now, we're going to spotlight a creator on Galaxy. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Coco. I am selling lots of cool stuff on Galaxy, whether it be archive or stuff from the local thrift store. It's my only hobby, so it's definitely something I have a lot of. I got started selling secondhand by literally just having a shopping addiction and needing to clear stuff out of my closet and then replacing it. So selling stuff is definitely my number one task weekly, truly. I mainly sell vintage designer, whether it be vintage Moschino, vintage Gaultier, vintage Chanel. It just depends on what I'm shopping for that month. But I'm always looking for new things, but typically always vintage. My vintage shopping addiction kind of started when I discovered how Levi jeans fit me back in the day. I loved finding the perfect pair of Levi's. So I literally had every colorway in every single one of my sizes, and I still have a huge stack. My favorite vintage pieces are either vintage hats or definitely just bigger baggy pants that I find in the men's section at Goodwill. Recently I thrifted a 70s Miu Miu bag while thrifting, and it was my best find ever. My advice to anyone who wants to start selling secondhand is definitely hit all of your local thrift stores, because each one definitely has a different vibe, whether it be one has more women's clothes, one has more men's. Definitely going to all of them and hitting all the spots, you'll curate the best pieces. My favorite part about selling secondhand is definitely just the clothes being worn. I feel like they're more authentic and comfortable definitely when they're worn in. Like a pair of jeans that you've had forever, they're 10 times more comfortable than like the pair of jeans you bought from Zara. So I think just having something that's been around forever is also just super cool. Shop my closet at shopgalaxy.com/Coco Muhor.
Welcome back to Finding Fashion. It's Pojo, and I'm here with Isaias, aka Queer Brown Vegan, our educational educated, a little bit of everything, I'd say, our sustainability baddie. So I'm so excited. We're going to get right into the fashion things today. Isaias, this is something I told you before. I'm really, really curious about your fashion, like your personal style, but also your take on fashion, etc. How has your style changed over the years? Did you have an aesthetic? Did you have a phase? I personally have been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, literally. But I want to hear about like your take on fashion and how it's kind of progressed over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. So I think for me, I grew up my whole life through thrifted clothing. Like my parents were like, you're not going to a mall spending $20 at Hot Topic. Like that's expensive. And so for me, like I grew up with all these like weird vintage clothes where my dad would give them to me. And so for me, it's like kind of weird. Like as a queer person, it's like my dad was always like, you need to dress this way as like a man, and like this very toxic masculinity.
Right.
And I think that did like had a lot of things I had to unlearn like throughout my career. But I think like in specifically when I was 17, 16, and 15, I had like the worst style. I just had such low self-esteem. I had like very long hair, didn't really know how to dress. And, you know, compared to like my sister and brother who are very stylish and like very like good looking, I was always like, I don't know how to like look good. And so I think when I went to college, I made myself a decision of like, you know what, it's time I change my style. It's time I get a haircut. It's time that I believe in myself. And the first thing I did when I went to college is get a job. I went to like Forever 21, which is like a fast fashion shopping, because I never went to the mall and bought all these like different clothes. I was like, you know, they're going to look so cool. Then I realized like how childish they looked like when I got 19. And I was looking back at myself and I was like, you really wore like, I don't know, like the weirdest clothes. Like you had like pepper socks and like people in your dorm would make fun of you saying like, why do you have like such weird socks? And I was just like, I don't know. I just wanted to express myself in a different way.
You were having fun
Yeah.
with it. And also like kind of that inner child, like just curiosity. Like I get it. I totally get it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I love a salt and pepper sock.
Yeah.
The hell? It's a vibe.
Yeah, and so like I just had this like very weird style, and then I realized like a lot of the clothing that was given to me in college, specifically from my dad and my brother, were clothes that they had growing up, specifically my dad like when he was in his 20s and 30s. And so he gave me a lot of his clothing, and then I started wearing it, and I realized, you know, my height, having long clothing, I really like that aesthetic. I like that fact of like it's just very simple and clean, and I was just like, I don't need too much. And so I started to wear these like long dress shirts that my dad had, and I started to create this relationship with myself of like, I don't need fast fashion clothing. And I bought it that first year when I was 18 because I thought I was missing out. I thought that I didn't have the coolest clothes, but in reality, all the clothes that my dad gave me were pretty dope, and like I still have them today. And I'm like, I thank him for that. And every time I go back home, I sometimes go to his closet and I'm like, hey, can I like have this, or like, can I borrow this? And he's just like, I don't care. You can take it if you want.
How do you shop for clothes with intentionality and like keeping like this perspective with like sustainability and stuff? Like, do you make a list when you see like there's a gap for something you need, or are you big on just like fixing pieces that you have already? Like, what's your take on like filling the gaps, if you will, in your closet?
Yeah, you know, I would say like it's really hard for me, especially when trying to fill my closet, is digitally. I am really bad at like looking at websites, specifically models that have my height, but I don't have the same body as the model. And so most often not, I'm like, I need to try out the clothing
Right.
to ensure it actually fits me nicely. And that's a really huge issue for me because, you know, like sometimes I need someone to at least like wearing the clothes live, so I'm able to be like, okay, I know how it looks like, I know how tall
Right.
they look like, they keep moving, they're not like a professional model where it makes me feel
Right,
like
and it's like the angles and the clipping. Trust me, I'll tell you guys, there's clips, there's this, there's that. Like it's different. It's different.
like the editing and things.
Yeah.
So I choose that. But I think another thing is I ask myself like the business that I want to shop at. So looking into like what materials they use, like what fibers they use, like the logistics of like who they pay, like is it like are they're transparent, but also like are they able to be traceable? What is their stance on diversity, especially like hiring models of color and other things like that. And so I try to be really realistic of like the price that I'm going to pay for clothing now, because I have the economic privilege to afford it, is more than $300 plus. But knowing the fact of like I'm very picky on what I'm going to be picking, because I also don't want to choose clothing, specifically as someone who's vegan, that is like anything that uses animal derivatives, or / the fact of like it has polyester in it. And that's been a huge issue, especially with the vegan community, of like the vegan leather issue and like the polyester issue. And it's like I've had to really ask myself like, you know, cotton or hemp, exists, right? But
Right.
also, is hemp and cotton as sustainable depending on the bioregion where I'm buying from or where they produce that cotton from?
See, that's where it gets really deep and
Yeah.
you could kind of go down the rabbit hole. Let's go into the vegan stuff though. I think that's so interesting. This is a conversation that we had a bit earlier, but like this idea that just because something's vegan means it's good for the environment or that it's the right choice. Or if you're vegan, your only option is this vegan branded thing that actually might have repercussions behind it. Like, what are the whole vegan leather industry? Let's start there. Like, what's your take? What are your angles? Like, what do we have to worry about, I guess, really, too?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think at whole, like the leather industry, not the vegan leather industry, is horrific, right?
Yes,
like it's
definitely.
the kill animals, the deforestation, the tanning of the chemicals used is also toxic. So people are saying it's biodegradable. Like, it's most likely not, because
Right.
leather we see today is not biodegradable. But the vegan leather issue, and I think this is something that I learned recently from organizations like the OR's Present and like the Slow Factory, which I give a lot of credit to them for their work, is kind of recognizing the fact that the current vegan leather or vegan clothing that exists, specifically, there is a lining of plastic in it called polyurethane. And necessarily, it's not to say like, well, it's not biodegradable, right? It's recyclable in some ways if they have the protocols and systems in
Right.
place. But the fact is that the amount of resources it uses in discarding of vegan leather, specifically, we know that when we discarded clothing or give away our clothing to charity or clothing to thrift stores, that clothing, even if it's not sold off there and it's not desirable, it's sent to a different country. And this is where I found out from like the organizations I mentioned, is that it's sent to the global south. And what happens is that it destroys the environment. It destroys the local economies of local fashion designers. And now they're not able to compete or sell their clothing because the clothing that's coming from the West, it's like it's at a cheaper price. And then from the clothes from like the own textile makers trying to get a living wage, they're out competed. And this is something that was so horrific that was reported from these organizations. And so I asked myself, like, when talking about vegan leather, we need to ask ourselves, like, there is not right now in market, there are conversations, 100% plastic-free, vegan, and biodegradable leather that exists. There are developments such as like Milo Unleather that I worked with them a year ago, and I know the Slow Factory is producing their own plastic-free vegan leather, but it's not scalable. Even Allbirds themselves, I've worked with them, and right now that's not out to market and that's not scalable. I think Stella McCartney did do a partnership a year ago with a vegan mushroom leather.
Yeah, I remember that. That was huge. A big industry jump. Like, that was a big thing.
And this kind of ask ourselves, like, how do biotextiles can create this change that are made from plants? But again, like that, it takes a lot of extensive research funding. And right now I'm at this point for myself of like, I don't really need clothing because I have so much clothing in my closet anyway, so I can divest away from that. But I do think that when people, specifically vegans, are saying buy vegan leather, that's the only ethical way, it kind of really distorts the fact of like, okay, what you have in your closet or what you might buy secondhand isn't going to be as sustainable. When in reality, I've had secondhand garments now in thrift stores, and you can probably agree to this, is that a lot of thrift stores now carry fast fashion clothes.
Oh my gosh,
it's
so
bad.
much. It's crazy. And it's sad because you realize like these are pieces that were like not only, they're like barely months old. You're seeing with the trends too. I was at a spot recently and I remember I was really excited because I found this like Hawaiian dress, like authentic, like everything made in Hawaii, like cool small business. I was like, where did I even find this? Like, this is crazy. And then I go to the next thing and it was like literally Shein. And I'm like, how crazy is that, you know, these pieces that were made to appeal to the masses and to just be like digested are not digested in the way that you're thinking. Like, it's in great condition. It's literally, like, you tell a lot of them, well, some of them pill really fast because the quality of the clothes it's not very good because the price point and the labor, we could get into all of that. But it's just really devastating when you realize that the system is so broken. It's so broken. And then it's just going to keep being recycled into until it ends up in a landfill. And I can only imagine the next person that grabs any of those pieces, if they even do, because the appeal to get them it's not very appealing in a space where it should be, you know, it should be given another life. It's just this weird, it goes back to that rage thing and this doomism and all that stuff. You're like, we created this problem. There was a demand for these items, and the demand, as soon as the demand was met. Do you have any advice, like, for other people shopping or making decisions about their closet? Like, where should people start? And I know, like, we could also talk about how thrift and consignment isn't always the best answer depending on where you are. Yeah, what's your take on like the best approach?
Yeah, I think for people just trying to save money in general is your siblings or your best friends. Like, I don't know if it's maybe some people find it uncomfortable or weird, but I traded clothings with my brother
It's like
or
a
my
closet trade,
sister.
right?
Like, I have clothing that I wear that was given from my sister that is femme clothing, and I wear it because it's like clothing should be genderless, right?
Yeah.
But I think for for my best friends, like we don't really find it weird. My friend was like, I really love your jacket, and I was like, you know what? I honestly haven't worn this jacket in almost a year. If you want it, take it. And I think we need to normalize that. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, like, like it's like shirts or pants or shoes. Like, yeah, like people are more likely to do that. And asking yourself too, like, if you're trying to become more conscious in your purchasing decisions, if you find yourself like, if you're a stylist, you're a fashionista, like I understand fashion is a whole different art. And I know that it's interpreted by so many different ways by so many people. And I appreciate that, right? I'm not trying to shame them for buying clothes, but maybe asking yourself, like, what are the ways that you're able to really redesign your relationship with clothing? And there's a lot of questions to ask yourself, like, are you going to wear this multiple times? Or are you going to use this in your other events? Is this clothing versatile? Can I wear it at a casual hangout, a professional hangout? Like, this is what we really get onto it because this is what you want to do and you save money. So, and also the last thing is kind of understanding the intersections of these issues, right? The fashion, right, is related to environment, land, and animals, right? And understanding like what are the horrific industries that exist for animals, specifically like within wool. Like that is something that's so horrible. I learned about in Australia from collective fashion justice movement, and then also like asking yourself like who is paid and like the factory collapse that happened years ago in Rana Plaza. Like understanding these events in history allows us to kind of create this more not self-shame lens, but more collective lens of understanding of what we're talking about.
All right, you guys, it is time to dig into Isaias's fashion finds. This is a segment that we're going to be exploring throughout the season where I ask my guests to bring a few pieces on that they can't live without, and we're going to hear about the story behind each piece. So let's get into it. So, Isaias, first of all, I want to just start throwing my hands in this bag and grab things, but I'm going to ask you to pull a piece that you can't stop wearing to start.
Okay, a piece that I can't stop wearing.
Yeah.
That is such a great question. So, there is a piece that I can't stop wearing. It is my lucky black velvet. Well, it used to be velvet, but it's like discarded over the years. But I've had it for almost since I think I was 16.
Oh my God.
This piece of clothing that was given to my dad. And it's like a simple black dress shirt. And I've worn it like in college, like to parties, to professional events, to like casual things like gardening with friends or like foraging in semi-cold or semi-warm days, and it really has lasted me for so long, and there's absolutely no tears what's so called. So I've had this. I'm 25 now.
Can
so
I
I've
feel
had
it?
this.
Is
Yeah,
that okay?
I've had this since I was like 16. And
Oh
it
my
was
gosh,
given to me by my dad, I think. So
you've really kept it in great condition too.
I'm actually surprised because like apparently ironing it in different temperatures or like not drying it properly or using the same chemicals like can damage it, but it's remained its same form.
Wow, that's amazing. And a classic black, like you can't go wrong with like something like that. That goes with everything as time goes on. I'm really impressed though that you can. Like, it's really durable too. I need to get my like game up with that. I'm gonna go through my dad's closet for that.
Yeah, no.
Now
definitely.
you're inspiring me with this Neil for my dad.
Closet.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so next piece I want to see is something that has a story behind it. I'd argue that had a story too, but we could all say every piece has a story.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think the next piece is really funny. It's actually an accessory. It's like a lunch bag / like foraging when I do other things, but it's like this upcycled like
stop. Everybody stop. Go Squeeze has entered the building in a rare form. Oh my God.
So a funny story about this is that I was given this back in 2000, I believe 20, after I finished my job and moved to TerraCycle, which is like a recycling company. And my manager, who I deeply love her till this day, gave me this bag.
Oh
and this is actually one of the original designs from TerraCycle. And for those who don't know, like before they had these like recycling boxes, the company itself had a lot of upcycling initiatives. So they had their really wonky products where they like upcycle things. things. And I would wear it on the subway in New York, and people would always like laugh or like compliment me for it. But you can tell like it's lasted for such a long time, and I use it. And I don't know, I feel like this is another creative way which like bags can be used to start a conversation with upcycling.
100%. You guys, this is just bringing back so many memories for one, and two, like what an incredible like initiative to use these to make such a sick bag. Yeah, it's also just such a testament to like the like food culture too. It's funny to also see like, wow, otherwise every time I've ever had a go-go squeeze, mildly depressing, but let me explain. Every time I've had a go-go squeeze, I've been in a pinch, and I have not been thinking about the waste that comes from a go-go squeeze. And now you get to literally keep this alive. When you say foraging, you mean mushroom foraging?
Yeah, mushrooms
Oh,
foraging.
that's sick. What's your favorite mushroom you forage? I'm curious.
Oh my god, it's like a beautiful orange mushrooms called Latipora sulphureus. It's called chicken of the woods mushroom.
Oh my god,
so it's
I
like
love
the big
chicken of the
orange
woods.
one. Yeah, so it's all in New Jersey and East
yes.
Coast, so.
Fun fact: when I was younger, I used to work at a vegan bakery.
Oh.
And I'd wake up at 5 a.m. and go open this bakery. Shout out Michelle, she was fantastic, and she would always make. She had an amazing forager in New Jersey, and she would make these fried hen of the woods or chicken of the woods like sandwiches. And
so delicious.
To this day, I can't get over them.
We'll
but I love the idea that they've passed through this bag.
Yeah, no, it's a survive time.
So cool. We have to go foraging together.
No,
Can I
we
come?
will this spring or summer.
I literally let
let's
me
set
know.
out a
I'm
day,
so in. Holy shit, that's amazing. Okay, amazing. I guess the last hurrah would be one piece that has stood the test of time.
Oh, this is such a great question. So I have actually this one, which we've had briefly talked about, but it's the brown corduroy dress jacket.
Oh yes.
And this is, I think, the unique story behind this is like, I think my dad, when he got his first job in the States, he like went to Old Navy, and he spent like, I don't know how much money for this, but Old Navy used to be expensive back then. And, I mean, now it's like a different story, but it's really great piece because he used it for, I think, his job interviews. And there was a time in college when I think I was 19 or 20, I was getting more into like professional careers and like trying to see like what are my options. And he gave it to me, and I started wearing it a lot in interviews or like professional events or like parties, and people would always compliment me on it. They're saying like, really love your jacket. We really love the design of it. And it's like, they would ask me where it's from. And I said, I think from like Old Navy. And people were like, well, they don't sell clothes like that anymore that look like that. So it's lasted a long time, and I think I've had it since I was 18. Now I'm 25, so
fantastic. You know what? When I see this jacket, I do think of you.
Yeah,
I do, because I feel like I've definitely seen like either amazing posts with it or just like in passing seeing you in this jacket. It's just cool to have staple pieces like that just like really reflect like something that you've carried with you. And no, this is fantastic. I also like, you can't go wrong with like corduroy, velvet, etc. Like these textures are
like the best color. I prefer that.
No, I do too. I'm trying to start collecting like more corduroy because I realize like it's a really easy way to elevate outfits, and it's also really easy to source like secondhand and like vintage. Like there's so many amazing cool designs that are out there, and that one being a great example, you know. And it also just shows like, don't fix what ain't broken, Gab. Come on, like this was killing it, you know.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool if they did like a recycling initiative where they like brought all their vintage back or something?
Yes, or ask people to bring it back so it can get repaired, because there's a lot of people that would demand for this. And I remember, I think in New York, someone asked me how much I would sell this for.
Really?
And I was like, oh, well, I'm wearing it right now. I wouldn't sell it.
Like, I wouldn't sell it. Sorry.
Yeah,
we love a hype moment.
But there are people who are invested a lot in fashion that I was like, wow, I didn't know people are so like would be so down to like buy it instantly.
Right.
But,
on your body too.
Yeah, I was like,
no, yeah, I've had a couple of situations like that where people were like just like, and then you're like kind of also like overwhelmed because you're like, and then you don't want to sell it. There's more of a reason not to sell it because you're like, oh, you want it? Well, I want to keep it. It's just like weird back and forth. Those are amazing pieces. Thank you for sharing all of those with me. I so appreciate it. This is like, it's just cool to see the pieces too that like just define who you are, and also define the way you probably approach styling in a day. Like I'm sure you're like grabbing for that jacket and it influences the shirt you wear underneath and stuff like that. So that's super cool. Yeah, it's just great to have stories attached to clothes.
Yeah,
I think
it keeps you
so
grounded in who you are as an individual. And I think that's what a lot of people miss about fashion and clothing. It's like, oh, it's just clothing, people just trying to be pretty or whatever. But like you said, it's more about a spiritual and religious and like family cultural sense to you.
Exactly. And that's the biggest thing, like carrying legacy, carrying stories, creating relationships with these clothes that are meaningful. I think if anyone can learn anything, hopefully from this episode and also from the work you do, it's that moving forward, looking at fashion as an exchange of energy and something that like is actually building who you are as a person, rather than like, I need a photo for the gram, I guess I need a new shirt. Like you actually don't need a new shirt for the photo for the gram, believe it or not. No one's losing sleep, and it's actually way better to influence people to rewear pieces and not be so freaked out by this like perception of like, oh, I gotta be like fresh and new all the time. Like it's such a toxic thing online.
Yes. And I think too, like, I think for myself, I've really worn a lot of these pieces in photos and like in different settings too, and like it works for me because I look good in them for myself, but also the fact, like you said, there is this mind behind my mind saying, I wonder if people notice I've been re-wearing the same thing, but that shouldn't matter,
right? And they should notice, and they should be influenced by it. It goes back to the influencer status you carry. It's like, I know you're influencing people to do the right thing and like do things that are really meaningful and actually helping the environment subconsciously as well. So you should be so proud, Isaias. Like, I'm so honored to have you on for this first episode, seriously. And like, just thank you for sharing everything. Like, you're such a beacon of knowledge and light and energy, and just, like, it just makes me excited. And I'm excited that you could be a part of like the Finding Fashion community and show people like what it means to be mindful, but also like not judgmental and like conscious of like also the masses and what it really means to like pivot into this space, which is very, as you know, like up and coming. It's time for people to really care the way you do. So
thank you so much again for having me and this community, for being here.
Of course. I think I have one last question as our little outro, if that's cool with you.
Yeah.
But let's say someone came on, listened to this episode, they're super inspired. They're like, okay, I never really thought about sustainability in my life before, but like, I want to start today. Do you have any advice or like first steps that maybe could be a step in the right direction for someone? I would say following him, for one, is definitely a good step. But do you have any like recommendations for people that are starting fresh right now and want to do something good for the planet today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like tap into your lived stories and your memories, because that's where the most sustainable journeys begin. Even if you don't see it as sustainable, or you saw it like, well, that was based off survival, that was because we were in poverty, or that was because like I had to grow up this way, or my parents were so against using these chemicals because they wanted a toxic-free home. Like, you know, asking yourself like, what are those relationships you have with those industries? And if you're a college student or you're a working professional in a different industry, like, you don't need to be in the environmental sustainability industry to create change. Asking yourself like, what are the current existing things that I can change about that? Whether you're working in fashion, whether you're looking into photography, like, how do you make a set zero waste? How do you become a zero waste chef if you're someone who cooks a lot? Like, there's just so many things that you can enter throughout the sustainability journey, and I think that's the beauty of it. And so rather than saying yourself like, I need to be exactly like this person, asking yourself like, how can I create myself using and pulling references and using some values from my own experiences, from what others I'm around, and also looking within my local community of what things can be done, even the most simplest things of like going to your local thrift store, going to your local like coffee shop and asking for different alternatives and things like that. So I think that's what really kind of gets people inspired.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, you're fantastic. I'm just like beaming with joy right now. Thank you so much for coming on Finding Fashion. This has been such a treat, seriously.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Well, please share with everybody your handles so they know where to find you online, /site, whatever you want to share. Where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can definitely find me at queerbrownvegan or queerbrownvegan.com. There's tons of resources I post online, and I also have sometimes digital monthly meetings with my community where we just discuss our stressors or what goals we want for the month, and just really low chats where we don't need to like talk about like what we want to do, but rather like where our hearts are at in this movement.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm definitely going to tune in for the next one. So excited. I also want to thank Galaxy so much for powering this podcast. We couldn't do it without you guys. Please make sure that if you want to explore your future fashion finds, you go check out Galaxy's website, galaxy.live. Go find some cool small creators to support. Go shop the live stream. And I'm at Pojo on Instagram. Easy to find. If you want to get goofy, I'm at Pojo Jojo on TikTok. So have fun with that. Do as you wish. But thank you guys so much for joining us on the first episode of Finding Fashion. It's your girl Pojo signing out. Isaias, you're the best. Thank you so much for just creating this universe with me. It's so exciting. And we'll see you guys very, very soon. Bye.